Lisa, do you want to welcome everyone officially now that the recording has started?
Yes, absolutely. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining today. Um, so, Or and I, we partner to organize the Leadership Learning Cluster events. So, we are passionate about leadership, all things leadership, and the idea is to kind of bring more leadership related focus to our events. And we are all you are all welcome, and this is specific type of event, the unwrapping leadership development. The idea is to get inspired, share some ideas, and what is happening out there, what companies are practicing, and we will start introducing our guests. And or would you like to go through the quick fire?
Yeah, before we go with the introduction, just want to make sure for everyone who joined and is not familiar with Butter, on the left side you can see your mic and video on the top left. In case you want to turn them on and off, you can also use shortcuts on keyboard with M for microphone and V for video. You would also see the React button where you can, like, while someone is talking, you can do some reactions to spice things up a little bit if you like what people are saying and so on. So feel free to use those. And there's also chat. And in the notes, you can flip between personal individual notes that will only be for you and will be sent to you by email afterwards. But you can also use shared notes where all of us can share notes and write some stuff that we want to remember from this session. We can circulate that later as well. Yeah, and now we'll head over to introductions. So we wanted to do this a bit like more interesting than just having a long talk from each person. And what we do is we'll do a quick fire round where we'll give David and Mike basically a few questions, and then they'll have to answer under like 30 seconds or so. Try to think for it. And yeah, not too challenging though, I promise. So the first question, I'll start with Mike. The first question is just to introduce yourself, the name, and basically what you do at work.
Yeah, so I'm Mike. I work at Vinted, which is a secondhand clothing platform. So we aspire to kind of create a world where consumption is sustainable. What I do there is I lead three functions. I lead the people growth and development team, internal communications, and knowledge management. And right now I'm in Vilnius, but I'm typically based in Berlin, and I am originally from Houston, Texas. What else? Is that cool?
I was just setting up the panel view, so it's
Okay.
a bit delayed. That's great, Mike. Thanks. You can start. David, you're up next with the same question.
Cool. Well, thanks, Or, Patricia, Mike. David, based in Amsterdam, have been here for about 5 years, but originally from San Francisco, California. And I currently do L&D for a cybersecurity company called Irdeto. I focus on a few things. One of them is manager development, which I'll talk more about in a little bit. Leadership programs, employee engagement. But yeah, excited to share and also to learn from you all as well.
Great,
Lovely.
thank you. Okay, second one. So David, you will start this one. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Mike?
Tea.
Yeah,
Nice.
it's good. We're starting on the right path. Next one, Mike, you'll start this one. Do you prefer taking notes on the computer or handwritten notes?
Handwritten.
David, what about you?
Handwritten, yeah. I love pen and paper.
Well, I'm cheating. I use a tablet. So it's still not quite pen and paper, but still handwritten.
I started doing the same thing. I love it.
So Larissa is asking if you digitalize the notes afterwards, or you leave on paper.
As that would be to David, because mine's already digital.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do a mix of both. I use pen and paper, and then I transfer it onto my computer. Depending on if it's work, then I use Word document. Personally, I use Notion.
Oh, interesting. Notion. Okay.
Okay, so we have 3 more left. We'll do this week. So David, do you prefer working remote or in person?
Oh, this is a tough. Can I choose hybrid?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Nowadays, yes.
But if I had to choose, I would say remote.
Yeah, this one is tough. So I do go to the office every day, but it's not necessarily to work with people in person. So I'm very, very open to the inclusion that digital affords. So I'm probably more prone to virtual work though I am at the office every day.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We have 2 more left. We're now moving more towards the leadership topic to ease us into the session. Mike, what's the best book for leaders to read that you would recommend?
Oh man, I think one that's hits me is Quiet Leadership by David Rock. So it goes all into the neuroscience of leadership and how leaders need to help people be in a toward state versus in a threat state, and how to help through questions and guidance help people stay in that toward state. And so I think that neuroscience is a neglected piece of a lot of what we do at work. And so, yeah, I think David Rock's book, Quiet Leadership, is a pretty good and accessible read around that.
People will be happy.
Yeah. David, then same question for you.
Yeah, well, along the lines of neuroscience, I've been doing a lot of studying into emotional intelligence over the past few years. Also got certified in the EQI 2.0. And so I would definitely recommend, well, anything from Daniel Goleman about emotional intelligence, because I think a lot of what makes good leadership is the stuff that's inside. And so I would recommend anything related to, well, neuroscience and emotional intelligence.
Lovely.
Yeah, great. And then the last question, and David, you'll start with this one, is what's your definition of leadership?
My definition of leadership is self-awareness. I think there's no one type of leader. When I've looked into all these studies and from my observations of all the people that I've worked with, but I think when someone understands their strengths, their values, their motivations, that allows this person to lead more effectively oneself and also others.
And for me, simply summarized, I think it's to help others be successful, be it individuals, be it teams. I know that sounds simple. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot, like what David just alluded to. There's no one way to lead. But at the end of the day, no matter what kind of team you're leading or people you're leading, from leading a country to leading a sports team to leading a function within an organization, it's there to help others be successful.
Yeah.
That's great. So thank you guys both for going through the quick fire round, and I think hopefully everyone can got to know you a little bit better. But it's also a good segue to talking then on the topics that you both recurred. So what we're going to do now in the next 30 minutes or so is we're going to have David and Mike each sharing some information that they prepared for us. And we asked them basically to join and tell us about something interesting they're doing in the area of developing leaders in their organizations. So Michael will talk to us about Vinted's principles of leadership development and why he has a strong distaste for traditional programs. And David will talk to us about manager development through the power of peer learning, which is a program that he's been running at his company, and basically the idea of connecting managers to share knowledge and also basing it on design thinking principles. Any one of you wants to start?
I can go first. Well, let me share. I have a few slides, but won't be doing too much on PowerPoint. So let me share my screen. And so your system preferences is preventing you from screen sharing. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Well, actually, let me just, oh, TiVo setting up a screen share.
Maybe in the meantime, I'll just say that if you have any, for like all the attendees, if you have any questions, I mean, we'll have 10-15 minutes at the end for Q&A. But if you have any question, you want to write them down, you can use the shared notes with this pencil icon on the left. Just make sure after you click on it that you're on shared notes, and we can just populate that like a list of questions that we can also go through later if we don't have anyone who wants to speak out loud and unmute themselves. But we'll have time for that later on. Don't worry.
Yeah, let's.
David, if you're having technical, I have no slides, so I could go first if you need some
Mike,
time.
why don't you go first? Yeah.
Okay, I can do that while you figure out the system preferences that are blocking you. Yeah, so hello everyone, and thanks Patricia and Or for inviting us to come and hang out with you today and learn and share together. So like Or mentioned, I was going to talk to you a little bit about our leadership development principles that are in a work in progress. So big disclaimer there, right? Work in progress. Could talk to me a month or 2 months from now and they could be changed. But our leadership development principles, and what these are not our leadership principles. That's a totally different tool of how we kind of define what leadership is at Vinted. The leadership principle, the development principles are kind of the guiding principles for my team and the growth and development function, and as well as the business partnering team, to kind of think about how are we enabling leadership development at Vinted, and what is the leadership development culture we want to cultivate or build at Vinted. And so there's just 5, and so I was going to talk you through a little bit of them, and then yeah, as Or also alluded to, I'll talk a little bit about my distaste for the leadership programs of the past that I've been a participant of, or I've also designed and delivered to, that when I look back, I'm not proud of or happy with. So to get into the leadership development principles, like I said, there's 5, and the first one is you are in the driver's seat. So each leader at Vinted owns their own development. They drive their own development. Vinted, the people team of Vinted is not there to do that for you. Your leader is not there to do that for you. You are fully empowered and enabled to take ownership of that. And we provide tools and resources to enable you to do that. So for instance, something quite unique at Vinted is we give not just leaders, it's everybody, roughly 10% gross of your annual salary as a learning budget. So you can, whatever your developmental needs are, whatever you need to work on to grow as a leader, you have this resource accessible to you to be able to go out and pursue those things, right? So if you're a leader, simple math, making $50,000 a year, you will have $5,000 that you can spend on developmental opportunities. Can range from, subscription to HBR or going to a leadership development workshop if that's the right thing for you, and everything in between, books, etc. So we really give resources like that to back up the fact that we say you own your development, you're in the driver's seat, right? Linked to that is the second principle of development is personal and requires reflection. So kind of like David already said, what is leadership to him? It's reflection, right? The second principle is development is personal and requires reflection. So by personal, typically a one-size-fits-all developmental experience or process is unlikely to be what a group of people needs. A one-size-fits-all approach rarely works for everyone involved. And leaders need to rely upon feedback from others and reflection upon that feedback and reflection of their own interactions and their own experiences to identify where are their strengths to leverage and maybe further push in their development, and also where are some developmental gaps or opportunities that they might need to focus on and grow. The third principle is leaders learn from leaders. All right, so the business partners at our company, to give an example of this, is have set up a leadership community, a peer learning community amongst leaders. And so like for most recently, they're doing an action learning series where leaders are coming together with problems to solve, and they're working with each other and learning with each other to address those developmental gaps as they all try to become better leaders to improve their team effectiveness. And so it's a guiding principle of ours that leaders aren't learning from us in a people function, right? In a growth and development team, the answers are actually already in the room. They don't need to come from us. The leaders has the expertise. They just need to learn from each other, right? And so we strive to enable that. The fourth principle is leaders develop leaders. And so this is more in relation to the leader of leaders, right? Every leader at Vinted is part of your responsibility is to develop the people that are on your team. And that's no different for the leaders who have people leaders reporting into them. Excuse me. And so part of our guiding principles here is to really emphasize that the involvement of that person, they don't drive it again. Remember, you are in the driver's seat. The person owns the driver's seat, but your leader, if they're not along for you in that ride in the passenger seat, giving you guidance, giving you support, checking in on the things you're doing with your development and helping you along the way, it's far more unlikely to be successful. So like an example of how that might come to life is if we are doing a developmental experience for a group of leaders, we also typically involve the leaders of those people so they know what are their people who are attending whatever this experience is, or working on, learning on what their role needs to be to support the person in whatever it is they're learning. And then fifth is leaders are not alone. And this really then speaks about the people function, mainly again, the business partner team and the growth and development team. But our role is to really enable these four previous principles I just spoke to come to life. So the Vinted people team role is to create an ecosystem of resources and tools, experiences, processes, communities of leaders that can really bring together the previous aforementioned principles. And so we use these principles internally within the team when we are identifying what do we maybe need to build or offer for the organization and to leaders specifically, and to make sure that what we're doing is reinforcing these principles and that these principles are guiding the decisions we make. Back to the one where development is personal, and my allergic reaction now to more what I would call traditional leadership programs is a lot of my career is in leadership development, but that's because I was leading teams on the commercial side. And so my main job, back to principle 4, leaders develop leaders, was really just to develop the leaders that were reporting into me, right? But I would have to attend leadership development programs at rather large companies like Starbucks or Nike, and you'd find that half of the content is not relevant to you, right? And I've also, since I've made this career pivot about 4 years ago, I likewise have designed and delivered similar programs for target audiences. Like at a company Or and I were together I was tasked to create a leadership program for middle management. Okay, well, you do a needs analysis for this population, and yeah, you come up with 5 or 6 topics to cover for that population, but the individuals in there maybe only need 3 or 4, right? But when you go and you build these leadership programs of back in the day where you want to solve 5 or 6 things in a series of learning sessions and a series of classroom facilitated or resourced experiences, it becomes ineffective because half of the time, half of your population is potentially checked out on the material because they're already quite comfortable with it. And so I found we're always landing at this place of the relevancy was always like 50% for a group because you're trying to cover so many things that isn't relevant to everyone. And so it's really through my own personal experience and both as a participant and as a designer and facilitator, come to this place where it's not about creating programs that allow, that cover a lot of topics. It's around creating experiences leaders and resources leaders can pick and choose from to where they almost build their own developmental experience, right? And so back to you are in the driver's seat as well. enabling them to identify where they need to grow, and then making sure that my team is providing access to those things as much as possible. And yeah, I guess that's all I really have to say is, around this is, I guess a question to answer is, why do we come up with leadership development principles? Because this is, I guess for me at least, again, I'm quite new in this, and a lot of you have probably been doing this a lot longer than me. Found we didn't really have at other places I've worked, be it consulting or before Vinted, we didn't have that guiding light. We didn't have that common understanding of what is the leadership development culture we're trying to build. We know what kind of leadership culture we might be trying to build. That's always quite evident anywhere I've ever worked. But how do we want to really facilitate the development to create that leadership culture has never had clarity on, here's our guiding principles. And so at Vinted, this is why we've crafted these, again, work in progress guiding principles, is to help us make good decisions on ensuring we're building that leadership development culture throughout the organization that we want to build and bring to life. That's me. Thank you for all the emojis. Lovely.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. I think it's been very insightful. I can see the a lot of people writing things in the chat, and
yeah, the notes are amazing in the chat as well.
Yeah, we're summarized in the notes. So if you need any proof that you were here, you talk to us, and you have it there. That's great. So I think so what we'll do next is we'll have David going next, and for the next like 10-15 minutes, and then we'll have time to go back to dive into more of these topics and ask more questions and so on for both speakers. David, do you want to try another time to share a screen? Or, okay.
Yeah, let me try sharing my screen, Patricia, and then. But it's a good segue. Mike, I like what you said about action learning, managers learning from each other, because that's what I'll talk about right now. So take a step back. When Orr and Patricia reached out and asked, like, hey, what are you doing a bit differently? I was thinking about everything that I've learned from this community over the past year. And yes, we have the traditional learning leadership development programs at our company. But last year, we decided to do something a little bit differently based on our constraints. And that's what I'll share right now. If I can get this thing to work, let's see. 1, 2, entire screen, window, Chrome. Okay, I see this. 1, is this going to work? The moment of truth. Well, Patricia, can you share, actually?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'll let you know when to, there's only 4 slides, so hopefully won't get this PowerPoint fatigue. Okay. And you can just do full screen. But today I'll talk about what we do in regards to manager development at Irdeto. Our development program is all about connection. It's all about peer learning. And it's about connecting managers to share knowledge, similar to what Mike shared earlier with us. And it costs, well, almost next to nothing, maybe $20 and a few cookies. So I'll take a step back. About a year ago, we were asked by the company to better support our managers in their development. Well, it makes sense because when we think about managers, they make up 70% of team engagement. So managers matter. Now, the problem was that, well, we don't have the budget of a big company. We had limited resources, and we were being asked not to spend. And manager trainings are really expensive. Then I remembered the one thing from my master's program in L&D, reading all these research articles. And the one thing is that 70 to 90% of learning comes through informal learning. So yes, learning can come from the classroom, but effective learning comes from the job. It comes from your peers. It comes from coaching, mentoring, and from different resources. I also thought about the master's thesis I did. I worked for startups for a little bit, and I was always intrigued by the fact that entrepreneurs did so much and they learned so much. So I sought their advice. What I found from talking to entrepreneurs was that they learn, yes, by doing, but they also learn by networking. They had a network of other entrepreneurs to learn from. Essentially, this is peer learning, informal learning. And so this was great because I thought, okay, we don't have a whole lot of money. It doesn't cost a lot. How can we encourage informal and peer learning? How can we connect managers at our company to learn from each other? Next slide, Patricia. So it was time to design our program, and I'll talk to you about how we designed this program and actually what the program looks like. I also worked in user experience for a number of years, working with designers in big tech. And if there's also one thing I learned from them is the power of user research, the power of understanding who your users are, who your employees are, and to design a service or product that meets their biggest needs. And so what I like to do even nowadays is to use, next slide, Patricia, the design thinking model from the D School that is taught to a lot of UX designers. And it really begins with empathizing with your users, understanding who the users are. So for us, who are our managers? Where are they? How many of them are there? What was their tenure? How many first-time managers? So we sought to do this, and next slide, Patricia. We first sought to understand who our users were. So we used workforce analytics to put together an analysis of our user base. From that user base, we then built these user personas of managers at the company. We also sent a survey to all our managers at Irdeto, trying to understand what their biggest needs were. We also interviewed them. We took a subset of around 10 managers globally, and we interviewed them based on, hey, what are your biggest challenges as a manager? Essentially, the outcome was not only to build a user profile, but it was also to understand what the biggest needs are in order to design something to fill that gap, but also to gain their buy-in as well. Because when I worked outside of HR, my biggest question and I guess the thing about HR was they would design programs and without asking people. So this was also to gain their buy-in psychologically as well. And through that process, we then began to, ideate and to prototype a program. The nice thing about asking people for their help was that we found champions in these managers. So we asked them to join our design sessions to design a program to meet their needs. The other input was external input. I've learned so much from this L&D Shakers community. So I took a lot of ideas from the community and used those ideas in this design session. And based on a needs analysis and a well-designed program based on the input from managers, we presented this to HR and the executive team, and that's how we got our buy-in. Well, now it was time to test and pilot this program, which I'll share in the next slide. Before launching this program, what was important for us to do was to do an orientation for managers in each of their offices to let them know, based on your input, this was what we designed as a team. And so this is our Manage at Irdeto program. And the goal is to connect managers to share their knowledge and to develop capability. Again, this complements our normal leadership development programs, but this program is done all in-house by L&D and also by peer managers as well. So I'll go through all of these at a high level. Leadership Hour, this was inspired by GitLab's leadership development program. This is a monthly 1-hour session on a specific management topic. So how it works is we'll have 1 or 2 days set in the month, and there will be 2 to 3 Zoom sessions per day. And the topics are based on the biggest needs of the company based on the survey, but also align with the current HR process. For example, the next leadership hour that we're doing is going to be about objective setting because we just started a new fiscal year. And during this 1-hour format, the first half is research, or it could be a guest speaker talking about their expertise. For example, one session we did was we had a peer manager who spent 20 years in the Irish police force as a detective sergeant. And what better person to teach conflict management than an ex-police officer? So this guy, Dave was his name as well, came in and taught this session. And it was very well received. It was something different, but there's so much we can learn cross-functionally from different industries as well. So usually the first half is based on research. And what I've done is for each session, I will buy a $20 ebook from Harvard Business Review. They have these really good guides about, well, conflict management, performance management. And I've been using this as well, the research to help guide these sessions. Now, the second part of this session is peer learning, where we put people into breakout groups to learn from each other, to share how they set team objectives, how they've dealt with conflict in the past. And so again, this is really about connecting managers to learn from each other. Now, the coaching circles, I'll move to the right for a little bit. This was actually inspired by many people and also the L&D Shakers as well. I remember attending a session from Blanca, a session from Marin, and a session from Amir, all about peer coaching. And so what a coaching circle is, it's a peer group will help a manager tackle a management challenge. And so, for example, recently we had a manager with a challenge of a team member that was under communicating. So the question was, how do I motivate this team member to communicate effectively? So we got everyone in person in the office in a room to help tackle that challenge, 6 other managers. And it was a great session. By the end of that session, the manager came away with next steps. But the other peer managers, it was also a great opportunity for them to, well, learn ideas from other people, but also to practice their coaching skills as well. One-on-one coaching, this is something that I'm currently piloting because I'm currently working towards becoming a certified coach. So I'm planning to offer 2 options for managers at Irdeto. Instant coaching is, think of it as office hours where people can come on a Friday afternoon and choose a slot, 50 minutes on my calendar, if they want to work through a challenge. The other one, a coaching journey, this is the more traditional coaching journey, 6 sessions over 3 months with a manager. So this is something that I'm hoping to do. Now, the community one, Mike also talked about this, but essentially the L&D Shakers, in my opinion, is one of the most effective forms of what we call informal learning from each other. And so we've brought together a group of managers, a smaller group in a Zoom channel to, well, share knowledge, to ask questions, and to learn from each other. The People Library, this is all about knowledge management. We have a lot of resources in many different places. So this is all about putting everything in one place that's searchable. We also have onboarding for managers, for first-time managers and new managers that join the company. And this is really about teaching managers about HR, people processes at Irdeto, because one challenge that we got from our survey was a lot of people were misaligned with HR information. So we decided to offer this not only to first-time managers, but also old managers if they want a refresher. This is 1 half day every few months for any manager that wants to refresh their knowledge of HR processes. Then we have mentorship. We pair managers with another manager. This has been established for quite a few years, and this has been quite successful at our company. And the last thing I'll talk about is Gallup's strengths. This is something that we rolled out in our company a few years back. There's a lot of research that shows the power of a strengths-based organization in increasing employee engagement. And what we're trying to do is to strategically target managers to help them become strengths-based managers and for them to be able to build strengths-based teams as well. So we do this via one-on-one coaching sessions and also team sessions. So essentially, this is where we are now. There's a lot that we're still experimenting with. We're constantly seeking feedback from our managers and also externally as well. We also are tracking these via our engagement platform, Office Vibe, and we've seen some uptick in a few metrics that we've been tracking. So yeah, this is our Manage at Irdeto program. We are going to continue going forward, iterating and seeking feedback. And that is my section.
Okay, lovely. So let me thank you both, David and Mike. I would love to go through the chat and see some questions. So we are live and open for the Q&A questions.
So there's quite a lot of questions in the notes.
Ooh la la.
Some more general, some of them for a specific speaker. So I think we can probably start with those.
Yeah.
And also, if there's someone who just wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, or you can use the Q button on the left side, just above the chat, and we can also take like live questions for the brave ones.
I will unmute. My name
Go
is
ahead.
Mick. I'm in the US. I'm in Oregon. Thanks so much for doing this at the end of your day so I can participate. Mike, there's so many different models for getting leaders together. I wonder if there's any particular sort of program structures that you used to get leaders into contact with each other regularly, like a framework or even just a program sketch would be super useful. Thanks.
Yes, I don't think there's a framework that we use, and the community is more driven by the business partners than by my team. And what they do is traditionally they've had a topic, and then they've put that topic out there and sought leaders who are interested in exploring that topic, and they come together and they co-facilitate together. There's literally the business partners aren't there to teach, they're facilitating discussion amongst the leaders to kind of help them uncover the answers themselves, because it is typically in the room. And like I'd mentioned earlier, they've recently have kind of pivoted to even a more open community focused on action learning. So no specific topic, just inviting leaders to come in and join that, and to engage around their own particular challenges they need to solve, kind of like what David was talking about as well, and to work through them in that pure environment. So there's not necessarily, I guess you could say action learning right now is the framework that is being leaned upon by the business partner team to help facilitate the community experience. But there isn't one intentional framework that we're using to build that. And Portland, awesome city, obviously the Nike mothership, so often, and my wife is from there, so often visit.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you both for the presentations. They were very interesting. I really like the guiding principles approach to leadership. And I also appreciate that you referenced the Neuro Leadership Institute and sort of I'm always thinking about what happens under the hood. So I'm curious to ask both of you, there are moments where leaders crash, where there's a perception of threat, when they're not at their best. How does that core problem that I think is oftentimes not addressed by multiple leadership models or by psychological safety, sort of how do you address that to continually have them cultivate that practice of recentering or recovering or moving from threat to safety? So I'm very curious to hear both how that problem gets situated and how does your overall approach help enable that, what I would call a reflexive capacity, because you have to continually train it so it becomes part of your reflex under pressure and under duress. Simple question.
Yeah, this is an easy one to unpack.
Yes.
David, do you want me to go first, or you have something?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't think we have anything intentionally or structurally that we do as a function. But the reflection piece is the key piece to come out of that, right? When a leader is in a threat state, they feel like they've made a bad decision, maybe they're having a tough time with the team, maybe business results aren't as they expected or planned. It's, there's a multitude of things that could be going on on that puts them, like you mentioned, in that threat state. If you don't stop and reflect and pull back, it's hard to get out of that threat state and get back into a toward state, because without that reflection, you probably then cannot reframe, right? And so you need that reflection to reframe, or I think you called it reflex, but I would call it reframing of what is the context I'm in right now? What is the situation I'm in? What has happened? What has come up? And then what is the way forward out of this? Because it's the important piece is getting back to that forward state, right? And not a reactionary
I'm curious,
state.
even, because I think that's with the benefit of the doubt post-crisis, but I'm curious more like when things are not working, when there's the overwhelm, because I think that there are multiple practices. I'm a embodiment leadership coach. And so there's, centering under pressure, relaxing your jaw, your eyes, breathing. And I think that is a blind spot of a lot of leadership, that there's the expectation that leaders will after the fact reflect, or after the fact sort of have an assessment and then be able to move forward. But I think the reality of these times is like leaders have to be able to, while they're falling apart, reassemble in the moment and then give their best leadership. I think that's kind of the expectation of this modern day life.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a really good answer for you, because it's a complex question, and it's a real question other than practice, right? All of this stuff only happens with practice. And so leaders have to learn from being in those moments. And if they aren't able to learn from being in those moments to think about what they can do differently next time they're in that moment, in that crisis moment, they will continue to repeat what they did the last time or what they didn't do the last time. But I don't think that's a really solid answer for what you're looking for. But that's the best I can probably provide. It's a good question.
I'll just add one thing to that, Mike and Tivo. I was looking at the survey that we sent to managers, and one of the challenges people faced, a lot of times when someone has a challenge, they don't know where to go or who to go. And so that's also where we think the power of having a community where people can seek help in the moment. That's where I think it can solve many of these challenges a few of our managers are facing, or many managers. For example, if someone has conflict or some type of issue, they can seek a group of peer managers or someone else in order to maybe role play a certain situation. So that's the idea. That's what we're trying to build with the community.
Thank you.
Okay. So let me jump in about one that it's here in the general questions. How are you addressing leadership development for executives specifically? One thing that I personally face, and probably others as well, some executives, they feel that I know it all. I'm doing that for so many years that I don't need to participate of those initiatives. I don't have enough time. And so how do you get them involved in those initiatives?
That's a big question, and something that we have asked. We don't have something really great in place, but something that we do is these leadership hours where we try to invite senior leaders to join, because while the assumption might be I'm a senior leader, I don't know anything, there's a big learning when a senior leader is in a room with other managers and these managers are providing feedback. And that becomes a very powerful way for them to learn, of getting real-time feedback. At least that's been some of the feedback that we've gotten, because often there's this disconnect between senior leadership and everyone else in the company. But when you get people in a room, it might be, and there's been times where it's been very uncomfortable for, I would say, a few senior leaders, but still that discomfort means there might be some learning, that they're getting some feedback that they don't know about. And that's a very powerful way to learn.
Love it. Thank you, David.
If I could add, again, I heard you say involvement, but then also to have them work on their own development, right? And so I think there's two things there, right?
In that sense.
Yeah, so let me start backwards with involvement. There, we typically have them as sponsors of, if we do something on a larger scale initiative or even a leadership development program, they're typically a sponsor. So, while I say I'm allergic to leadership programs, we do offer some for very select people. Like we have a first-time leaders program called Launch into Leadership for internal promotions, going from individual contributor. And within that, like our VP of engineering is one of the co-facilitators. So they're in there with somebody from my team, delivering the experience for these new leaders and imparting with them. For them embracing their own development, I think this is where our learning budget and you are in the driver's seat aspect of our principle really comes into play, because they have that point of view because they have been a leader for a long time, right? So it's not that they necessarily have the attitude of I know it all, but they have very select things that's going to be quite different from the person sitting next to them. And so doing like a program for executives is probably would fall, has fallen, what I've done in consulting, falls flat on its face because their needs are so mixed. But when you have them in the driver's seat and you give them the resources, we have our, sitting in our C-suite, people who are actively using their learning budget to pursue their developmental needs to become better for their team or to become more strategic leaders, whatever their situation or context is, right? So being able to put it in their hands and give them that ownership, I think is a key way of getting them involved to facilitate their own growth.
Lovely. Thank you, Mike, for your take on this.
So there's a question here for David in the notes. What question did you ask your user group of managers when designing your program?
Oh yeah, I was just responding to Ben in the chat. In that survey, in the initial survey and the continuous survey, we ask about some of the biggest challenges. There's always an open-ended question, what are your biggest challenges? We also have a list where people can select multiple choices of what their biggest challenges are. And there's always an option to add the other option. So based on that gives us a way to analyze what the biggest needs are. And then an open-ended question explaining more about that challenge. We also have a few other questions based on ideas and suggestions, like what ideas they have when it comes to manager development. But it's pretty simple. But the biggest thing is to seek their input, what challenges they're currently facing, and and we send this on a quarterly basis.
And Mike, I think there was a similar question where you mentioned something around to allow people to grow to where they need to grow, and there was a question regarding how do you map the leadership needs, basically development needs for your leaders.
Yeah, so we do have, in addition to our leadership development principles, those are really more for the people team to a certain degree. We do have our own, the organizational leadership principles, right? So there's what we call the Vinted Leadership Way, which is 4 principles, and within those 4 principles has 16 attributes in total of just leadership behaviors or capabilities that we all aspire to embody as leaders at Vinted. And so we use that as our guiding light for first, from my team, thinking about when we're creating any kind of program or experience, or if we're seeking resources or curating resources, we anchor those resources to those attributes of the leadership way and those principles. But when it comes to the leader, again, they're in the driver's seat. But then remember that second principle was leadership development requires reflection, right? And so through that reflection and understanding of where am I gapped as it relates to the leadership way, and where are my opportunities as it relates to how we aspire to be a leader at Vinted, that helps then leaders identify where they need to go work on. And then we, as my function, again, like I said, strive to provide resources, experiences, etc., for each of those things. So if I find I need to work on giving and seeking feedback or something like that, as one place I need to work on, then I go to look at the Leadership Way library and what are the resources available to me, be it an e-learning, be it an in-house experience, or be it some curated free resources or paid resources I can use my leadership, my learning budget on. And so that's how we map, is through that reflection piece, leaders through feedback, identifying where they may need to grow as it relates to the Vinted Leadership Way, and then using that as their North Star to then identify how they can develop and grow that.
Okay, thank you. And I think we might have time for another quick last question. Thibaut, do you still have a question to ask?
If I can, just regarding this last comment. So in the performance review, you look back at these attributes, and there's a formal feedback regarding, Larissa, you should work on getting feedback and creating a safe space for your team. Then, do I also get the perspective, or is more based on self-reflection?
So yes and no. In the sense that we don't do traditional performance management here. In fact, those are 4-letter words. We don't try to even use the word performance management. We use impact enablement. So we're not here to manage people's performance. We're here to enable people to have impact, right? If you're managing performance, you probably got an underperformance situation. So that first. So then with that is more of a continuous feedback culture, where we aspire to have people not get feedback, but seek feedback, because back to that threat towards state, when you get unsolicited feedback, it can, like it or not, put you in a little bit of a threat state. And so part of our annual continuous cycle process experience of impact enablement is the expectation you are seeking feedback from people you work closely with, your direct reports, throughout the year, anytime feedback, if you will. And through that, things will come up. And then certainly that we do have quarterly impact discussions where your leader in person sits down with their leader, or in this case, a leader would sit with their leader. But as it relates to our leadership way, that is done through another tool of self-reflection that is not necessarily directly connected to your impact discussions or your annual compensation, to keep that feedback as safe as possible. That's truly just used for setting growth goals versus business goals. And so there is a mechanism for leaders to set their own personal growth goals, is what we call it. And that's where they would, if they've run feedback on themselves as leaders and sought feedback in kind of a more traditional 360 form, that feedback is used to inform those goals, but does not play into the performance management model directly. Indirectly, of course, does, because whatever you grow should then turn into impact on the role, and then there should be an improved business result and a change in behavior, right? But it's indirect, not direct.
Amazing, thank you.
Yeah, so I think it's time for us to wrap things up gradually. So I guess let's give a big round of applause to David and Mike.
Thank you. That's the best part of Butter, is the sound effects the facilitators can make. In my opinion.
So nice.
Yes.
And we have one last question, or one last poll that we wanted to share with everyone. Basically, just asking, from everything that you heard today, what's the biggest learning for you? What's something that sticks with you from the conversations you heard today? So feel free to answer it now. And for any of the questions that were set up, the shared notes, everything, we'll share that also afterwards, along with the recording, so everyone would have access to all this. Any final words from David and Mike before you guys wrap up the day and head over to relax a little bit?
Final words. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate the space, also the questions, and feel free to connect on LinkedIn would love to, well, learn from you, and always open to ideas and feedback as well.
Yeah, and I would just echo David on the space, right? Like, I know we're up here presenting what we're doing, but nothing we're doing is perfect, and your questions are thought-provoking, and we can learn from those questions, or I learn from those questions. And so I've really enjoyed that and found it valuable. And you can connect with me too on LinkedIn, but just drop a note in the connection that you're connecting through me from here, because I'm kind of a bulldog about rejecting if I don't know why you're reaching out, because you might be wanting to sell me something, because people are selling stuff all the time. So just drop a note from the L&D Shakers leader community, and I'll gladly connect with you.
Fantastic. Thank you both. It was super insightful on my end as well. I left with a lot of notes, and I need to explore the notes from everybody. And thank you everyone for joining. I think, or that we can, if we need to click in end now so people can see everyone's answer, or
We
everybody
already
seeing.
see.
Okay, good. So, or he's the expert on butter.
Getting there, yeah. Yeah. So if you, if you want to drop, feel free to drop. I think we need to end anyway. So thanks again for everyone to join as well.
And if you have an additional minute, there's another question as well about. Okay, yes, start poll. So what we would like to see in terms of leadership topic in our future event. So we are organizing monthly events, and Unwrapping Leadership Development is all about inviting incredible guests like Mike and David to share what they're doing. And this is not the only way to unwrap leadership development, but this is one of the ways that we will continue to explore moving forward. So if you have any topics in mind that it's of your interest, just let us know. Okay, so top 3 skills, leadership strength.